Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today, I'm looking at the first part of a live stream on the Inspiring Philosophy channel that was put out as a response to my top 10 arguments for God and why they fail video. I'm not going to respond to the whole thing in one go, so I chopped their stream into segments and took out them talking about other topics as well as most of their super chats. Now, before we even get into the first argument that I presented, it is worth mentioning that these guys seem to have misunderstood what I was trying to accomplish with the video, and yeah, I probably wasn't clear enough about that, so let me state it explicitly here. That video was not about proving that there is no God, it was me explaining why someone like me might find those arguments to be unconvincing. But numerous times throughout, they will respond to one of my points by saying that I haven't given an alternative explanation, so the argument still stands. And yeah, I didn't in most cases because that's not what the video was about. Anyway, the first part was on Pascal's Wager, so let's take a look.
He requested we look at this video today.
Did I?
Yeah, this was your idea.
No, this was somebody else's idea that they brought to me.
No, this get your act together. We've already blamed you.
Do you think I'm going out of my way to watch Rhino?
I don't know what you do in your spare time. I don't even want to know.
Alright, so we know right out of the gate now that he will not be taking me seriously, which is fine. I am a deeply unserious person after all. But this sort of angry curmudgeon persona that Mike is putting on did take me a bit by surprise. I don't really follow his channel, so it has been a long time since I've watched one of his videos, but my previous experience led me to expect that this video would mostly just be him presenting the philosophical objections to the points that I raised in a relatively neutral manner. Well, if angry curmudgeon is what Mike's audience wants, then who am I to say that he should be more serious? Have you seen me?
We're going to be looking at this video that Rhino put out where he debunks 10 arguments for God's existence, destroying theism. It's the end of the world. No one will ever come back from this.
Yeah, again, this is my fault for using hyperbole for the sake of clicks, I guess. I am aware that I didn't actually destroy anything. To reiterate, the purpose of that video is to explain why people find the arguments unconvincing. I know that it didn't destroy anything.
Yeah. Well, the problem with a lot of Rhino's arguments is that he doesn't understand the arguments, at least a good portion of them.
Well, if so, I would like to change that. Teach me, O learned one.
So let's play a little bit of this, and then we will pause. The first one he's going to do is Pascal's Wager, which is, I think, his longest portion, at least one of the longest portions. So.
Mostly because I did spend a lot of time directly quoting Pascal in that segment, but yes, that was the second longest segment of the video. Now he plays my segment for a bit, I will play it as well so that you can see the full context of everything, but yeah, I am going to let it run for a while.
Okay, so let's get into his arguments for God's existence, and then we'll respond and show where he is going wrong.
Let's start with the weakest and work our way up to the better arguments. So coming in at number 10, we have Pascal's Wager. Named for Blaise Pascal, he apparently didn't think it worth publication as it was first published in Pensée, a posthumous compilation of his unpublished notes. The basic idea is that either God exists or he does not exist. And this will lead you to one of four scenarios. If God exists and you believe he exists, then you stand to gain an immeasurable reward for your belief. But if he exists and you do not believe he exists, then you will be punished immeasurably for your disbelief. On the other hand, if God does not exist and you believe he exists, then you lose very little. And if he does not exist and you believe he does not exist, you gain very little. Given the immeasurably large gain if it turns out that God exists and you believe in him, it makes sense then that you should believe in him even if he does not exist, because the stakes are just too darn high to do otherwise. Notably, Pascal in the preamble to this argument states that reason cannot be used to come to a conclusion about the existence of God, stating God is or he is not. But to which side shall we incline? Reason can decide nothing here. According to reason, you can do neither the one thing nor the other. According to reason, you can defend neither of the propositions. So one of the starting assumptions of Pascal's Wager is that there are no good arguments for or against God. So you may as well believe in God on the chance that he is real and will reward you for it. But I'm sure many of you have noticed a glaring problem here. It assumes that the Christian God is the only option. What if I believe in God, but I find deism to be easier to believe than Christianity, or Islam, or Hinduism, etc.? Well, then, if...
Real quick. If you think Islam is a good option... we've got so many issues right
I was
there.
waiting for it.
Did I say that Islam was a good option? I wasn't arguing for Islam. I was merely mentioning that it exists as a religion. I agree with you, Mike. Islam is not true. This is just a weird thing to fixate on here.
I mean, there's no evidence for Islam. Their argument from scientific miracles in the Quran debunked. Perfect preservation of the Quran debunked. Now even the argument Muhammad's in the Bible, like Sajid Lippam is saying, yeah, that's not true. So Muhammad's not in our Bible.
I haven't looked into most of those, but there are definitely Bible verses that I could see being interpreted as references to Muhammad, at least as clearly as a lot of the supposed Old Testament prophecies that apologists claim are referring to Jesus. John 1:20 and 21, for instance, says, "He confessed and did not deny, but confessed, 'I am not the Christ.' And they asked him, 'What then? Are you Elijah?' He said, 'I am not.' 'Are you the prophet?' And he answered, 'No.'" One of Muhammad's titles is the Prophet, and this verse is clearly talking about the Prophet as a separate entity from the Christ, so it could very easily be interpreted as referencing Muhammad. Do I think that it actually is? Of course not. But that's miles better than the vast majority of the supposed prophecies of Jesus on that list of over 300 mentions of Jesus in the Old Testament that I go back to regularly. Let's do another one just for fun. Using a random number generator, I got 110, so let's see what the 110th prophecy is. And the 111th is from the same section of the Bible, so let's do both. Psalm 40 is a Psalm of David, so this is ostensibly King David writing a song of praise for God. The prophecies are found in verses 9 and 14. Verse 9 says, "I have told the glad news of deliverance in the great congregation. Behold, I have not restrained my lips, as you know, O Lord." Verse 14 says, "Let those be put to shame and disappointed altogether who seek to snatch away my life. Let those be turned back and brought to dishonor who delight in my hurt." So, yeah, nothing really screams Jesus here. It's the author saying, "I preached about deliverance" in the first one, and praying for protection from people who seek to hurt him in the second. Sure, Jesus also preached about deliverance, but it's not clear that this is written in the form of a prophecy, and preaching about deliverance is a very common theme all throughout the Bible. It's not specific to Jesus. Same with divine protection from those who seek to hurt God's chosen people, though that one's kind of on again, off again, depending on how God is feeling about his chosen people on any given day. If these two verses can be about Jesus, then I don't see why John 1:20 through 21 couldn't be about Muhammad. Again, just for clarity, I do not think that it is actually about Muhammad. That would be absurd. I just think that if we're being consistent in judging what verses count as prophecy, the verse in John actually does a better job at pointing to Muhammad than the verse in Psalms does for Jesus. If Christianity ends up being true, I am just as fucked as I would have been if I didn't believe in God at all. But if reason is insufficient to arrive at a conclusion about the existence of a God, then how can it possibly differentiate between the different gods? Pascal even said as much, pointing out that we cannot possibly have any comprehension of the nature of God, pointing out that we know that an infinite exists. Numbers, for instance, are not finite. There is an infinity of numbers, but we do not know what it is. It is false that it is even. It is false that it is odd, for the addition of a unit can make no change to its nature. Yet it is a number, and every number is odd or even. This is certainly true of every finite number. So we may well know that there is a God without knowing what he is. So now we're left with a bit of a conundrum. If we believe that God exists, but the God we choose is the wrong God, then we still lose everything. That said, even at this point, it still makes sense to choose God and hope for the best. There's still a potentially infinite reward on the table, and while the odds of an infinite punishment have gone up, you're still guaranteed to lose out if you don't pick a God. Right? Wrong. Inherent to your choice of which God to believe in is also a choice to live your life in accordance with the claimed desires of that God. Pascal was explicit that this entails a sacrifice of pleasures. Quote, "I would soon have renounced pleasure, they say, had I faith. For my part, I tell you, you would soon have faith if you renounce pleasure." His solution to the problem of not being able to make a conscious choice to believe in God was to renounce pleasure in order to gain faith, which almost makes faith seem like a coping mechanism. Can't feel good, may as well believe that I'll feel good later to compensate. And that is the problem. If you follow his advice and renounce worldly pleasures, but it turns out that God did not exist, then you literally turned the only life you will ever get into misery for no reason. You threw away literally everything for the hope of gaining something after death, but gained nothing. That is such a large downside. And even if God is real, if you give up all your worldly pleasures but still can't make yourself actually believe in him, the Bible says you still go to hell. So you missed out on the pleasures of life for the sake of an eternal reward and still wound up with eternal damnation. If that's how it's going to go anyway, I'd rather at least enjoy my century or so of life while I have it. But really, this argument gets the bottom rung due to a technicality more than anything. You see, it's not actually an argument for the existence of God. It's an argument for belief in God, whether or not God is real. It doesn't even pretend to offer proof of God in any way whatsoever. I point that out because number 9 is, in my opinion...
All right, before we get to number 9, let's talk about Pascal's wager here. For one thing, before we even get to that, he's sort of assuming that Pascal, or his interpretation of Pascal, is like, if you choose theism, you're not going to have a life of pleasure.
That wasn't my interpretation of Pascal. That's what Pascal explicitly stated. I wasn't the one who came up with the phrase renounce pleasure in relation to Pascal's wager. That's what Pascal said needed to happen in order to gain faith. You renounce your pleasure and gain faith in return. You are free to disagree with Pascal and say that the Christian life is full of pleasure if you like, and we can have that conversation, but don't tell me that when I quoted what Pascal was saying, that was just me interpreting his words.
And I would push back. I would say, arguing from Aquinas and natural law, that choosing Christian theism is the most fulfilling, flourishing, pleasurable life out there.
And speaking as someone who has been a sincere and devout Christian for a good chunk of my life, I disagree. I feel far more fulfilled and happy as an atheist than I ever did as a Christian.
Like as Peter Kraft said, the damned will say they've always been in hell, and the saints will say they've always been in heaven.
And speaking as one of the damned, no, I do not feel like I am currently living in hell.
This is something I've pushed. Like, one of the reasons to become a Christian is because your life gets more fulfilling. You have a peace that passes understanding. Jesus said, I have come so that you will have life and have it abundantly.
From what I've seen, there is more peace to be had on the atheist side of things. Since it's fresh in my mind from last week's video, I'll use that as an example. I do not need to get my knickers in a twist over whether or not people are having sex without being married first. Whether or not strangers are sexually active is not something I ever find myself worrying about. But preachers and apologists can regularly be found working themselves up into a tizzy about the sex lives of people that aren't them. Seems like it'd be much more peaceful just to live and let live.
Does that mean we're always happy? No. Does it mean we don't have struggles? We don't have to carry our cross? No. But there's a more fulfilling life involved. And of course, sociological research shows this, that Christians report high levels of happiness, well-being. They have more coping mechanisms going through things like cancer. They have lower rates of depression, lower rates of suicide, better family structures, lower levels of aggression, more self-control. I mean, check out my video, Is Christianity Harmful?, where I go through a ton of that data.
How many of those things, I wonder, are caused by being Christian rather than being part of the social majority? I'm not going to get into all of those metrics, but research into religion and happiness rarely separates out which religions they are looking at. It's almost always in the context of how often a person attends a religious service. And pretty consistently, they find that people who attend more often tend to have higher subjective well-being scores. But since it's not separated by religion, it stands to reason that the higher well-being scores are the result of essentially being part of a social group with shared values. But that also doesn't tell the full picture. People who are part of the social group but do not share some of the values can be very negatively impacted. And this is particularly prevalent in LGBTQ youth. To quote a 2015 study, LGBT young adults who mature in religious contexts have higher odds of suicidal thoughts, and more specifically chronic suicidal thoughts, as well as suicide attempt compared to other LGBT young adults. So, yeah, there is a psychological benefit to conformity, but many people are unable to conform for a variety of reasons, and trying to pressure them into trying to conform ends up being worse for their mental health than just not conforming in the first place. But what about when the research does look at religion separately? Well, then we find that Protestants are the happiest, scoring an average of 3.21 on a scale of 1 to 4. Buddhists and other religions are second with a score of 3.17, Catholics are third with a score of 3.13, Jews and Hindus are neck and neck with scores of 3.06 and 3.05 respectively, Muslims and non-religious are similarly close with scores of 3.03 and 3.02 respectively, and then the only group to score below a 3 were Orthodox Christians with a score of 2.72. So it appears that, at the very least, there is not a correlation between happiness and the correctness of your religion, thus supporting the idea that the psychological benefits that come with religion are because of social factors rather than actual truth.
So I would just push back and go, sociological speaking, Christians actually do live very happy, fulfilling lives and lower rates of depression. I mean, I'd much rather be a Christian than a secularist, even in just the pragmatic sense.
Well, in just the pragmatic sense, Buddhists and pagans are better off than most Christians. But the thing is, while it is nice to look at statistics and say religious people are statistically more happy, therefore everyone should be religious just from a pragmatic standpoint, there are individual factors at play here. For me personally, I continued attending church and going through the motions of being religious for about a year after I realized I was an atheist. While I was a Christian, yes, church was good for my mental health. But that year where I was just going through the motions was one of the most painful years of my life, despite the fact that I was not only attending a Christian church, but was in the category of Protestant, which wound up being the happiest of all the categories.
That's the thing that really stood out. Like, putting aside the fact that he's focusing on Pascal himself here, rather than like some of the updated literature on this.
Yeah, how dare I focus on the writings of the guy who it's named after?
The fact that the thing that stood out to me the most was exactly what you're pointing to, because the way he phrases it was, well, you're just basically giving up everything. And if you're wrong, you lose everything. And it's like, what am I actually giving up?
Yeah.
For both, like, I'm just giving up some hedonistic tendencies at the end of the day.
Yep.
bro, is that like all you're focused on? like, is your life seriously just like sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and that's it? Like, no, I don't think that's what you're gonna say. So why are you phrasing it in such a way? Like,
you are correct. It is not what I'm going to say. I'll point out things like being able to make life decisions without worrying about whether or not it's a sin. Do I want a beer with my dinner? Well, depending on which Christian you ask, it's either fine or it's a sin. Do I want to go watch a movie? Well, better check the Dove Foundation's website to see if it's got their approval. I wouldn't want to anger God by enjoying the wrong kind of movie. Do I want to listen to this music? Better make sure it's not rated as explicit first. God doesn't like the swears. But also sex. I am not currently married to my partner, and when we have sex, I can just enjoy it without worrying about whether or not it makes Jesus sad. And even for sex acts within marriage, I remember being a young married Christian man scouring the Bible for passages that could answer the question of whether or not oral sex was okay, because it's something that I really enjoy, and Christian opinions are divided on the matter. The Christian has to navigate life asking themselves these questions over and over again, often being forced to decide between different Christian leaders coming down on different sides of the issue. The atheist can just enjoy enjoyable things without worrying about the implications for the next life. Now, I have no idea what Mike's position is on any of these issues, but the way I see it, best case scenario here is that he could come back and say, of course you can have a beer with dinner. Jesus' first miracle was turning water into wine. Why would he be against alcohol? Or, yeah, just go see the movie. Enjoy. Even if it depicts sinful actions as acceptable, you can just enjoy it for the fictional story that it is. And given his lack of complaining about me swearing so far, I don't think he has an issue with swearing. So sure, listen to that music that has the explicit rating. But the fact of the matter is that even if he does have those very reasonable opinions, there are other Christians who do not share those opinions and who would preach against alcohol, secular movies, and explicit music. So the Christian layperson looking for guidance can find opinions either way, both using Bible verses to support their positions. So either you're giving up these simple pleasures in life, or else there will always be a nagging concern that you are wrong to not give them up. Again, to bring it back to my own experience, I have a confession to make. When I was a teenager, I was a massive fan of the band Creed. I'm sorry. I know you all lost a bunch of respect for me just now. A lot of people will tell you that Creed is a Christian band, but I knew better. While the lyrics often used Christian imagery, all of the band members denied being a Christian band, and some of their music supports that. The song What's This Life For example, has a repeated line in the bridge section that uses the word goddamn. The whole bridge is, but they ain't here anymore, don't have to settle no goddamn score, 'cause we all live under the reign of one king. Now, my young Christian brain got a bit short-circuited over this one. On the one hand, we all live under the reign of one king is clearly a Christian message, but they're profaning God in the line right before that. So I had many a good think over this, and eventually I settled on the score that he's talking about has been damned by God, so it's a proper use of the word goddamned rather than being blasphemous. Navigating life being worried about trivial bullshit like this sucks the joy out of what should be just fun moments. So the ability to just enjoy the fun moments of life is something that is lost if you take Pascal up on his wager and become a Christian just in case it's true. Now, when we come back into his video, I will have inserted a super chat from later in their stream that serves to make a similar point to this, so I did want to address that here.
I'm fine if you want to answer in a different video. It is a sin to euthanize at old age. And as you're losing the ability to care for yourself, if you don't have money or family to take care of you, that is an interesting argument. I totally see the logic in it, to die peacefully in old age. I think there needs to be moral justifications for it though. Like, so you're like, you're on your last leg kind of thing possibly, but I also do have some objections to it because I worry about the ramifications of that and how far that would go. How that's going to pragmatically play out in society. Like, we don't want to end up like what's kind of going on with Canada right now, where people are euthanizing because they're depressed, and there are companies forming to help you do it. That's a dystopian nightmare.
This sounds like a utilitarian kind of view, which I would kind of outright reject.
And I think on virtue ethics, I would say there's still no reason you're not going to increase in virtue in those last few moments. Why deny that?
So there we go. This is actually way more important than anything I've discussed so far. Someone comes to the end of their life and they reach a point where medical assistance in dying seems to be a better option for them than to continue living in pain with no friends or family to care for them. And rather than just being a decision that has you looking at your actual life experience in the here and now, Christianity has people wondering if this would count as suicide, thus sending them to hell for not wanting to live in pain. Now, the medical assistance in dying laws in Canada are by no means ideal, and yes, there have been situations where people have applied because of poverty rather than because of medical issues, but that's something that would be mitigated with a robust social safety net, which I think we should absolutely, beef that up a little. As to the companies forming, I have no idea what he's talking about there. Medical assistance in dying is something that you apply to the government for, and it takes place in hospitals. But this is an issue that does certainly come with many ethical questions and conundrums. What doesn't help with that is the overarching concept of a God that has an opinion on it, and you must make your decision in accordance with that opinion with, once again, different Christians coming to different conclusions. Even here, Mike and his co-host are disagreeing on this issue, so one wonders how the questioner feels about their answer. As an atheist, I don't need to worry about eternity when thinking about the issue. I only look at the implications in this life. And I will freely admit that, while I do think medical assistance in dying should be available in some form, I have very mixed feelings about what it should look like. Like, on the one hand, you should be of sound mind when you make the decision. But Alzheimer's and dementia both run in my family, so there is a very real chance that in my future, there will come a time when I will be physically healthy but mentally absent. I do not know whether that is something that I want to live through. Until I actually experience it, I'm not sure that I would want a solution as final as death. But by the time I do experience it, and decide that maybe death would be preferable, I will no longer be of sound mind. What is the right answer here? I honestly don't know. But in the end, whatever choices I may make about this, I make them without having the extra stress of wondering whether or not God approves of my choice.
Christians are just simply have a lot more, they have a lot better virtues, a lot better lives. See my debate with Lawrence Krauss, see my debate with Phil Zuckerman. I mean, it's just over and over again, Christians tend to live far more fulfilling lives.
So I'm not bothering with the Krauss debate, but I did watch through the Zuckerman debate, and it was mostly just the two of you talking past each other. I feel like it was mostly due to it not being clearly established what the topic meant. The topic was, which is better for humanity, Christianity or secularism? Mike pointed out early on that he is not advocating for Christian theocracy. He simply believes that societies that are based on Christian values, where the majority of the population identifies as Christian, are better societies.
By Christian societies, I mean societies that are based on Christian values and the majority of the population identifies as Christian, regardless of governmental laws. And by secular societies, I mean societies that are based on secular values, and the majority of the people identify as secular atheists. And I want to be clear, I'm not arguing for theocracy or any type of government. This is about the nature of different societies, not governments.
But then he goes on to list a bunch of secular values, like the separation of church and state, and claim that they are actually Christian because they originated in Christian societies. The whole idea of secularism is that religion is a private affair, and as such has no place in the government that is supposed to represent all of its people. So how separation of church and state could possibly be an explicitly Christian value rather than a secular one is just beyond me. To be clear, I am not saying that it can't be a Christian value. This isn't an either-or here. There can be value overlap between worldviews. But also, given the behavior of many of the American Christians in government, it certainly is not a universal Christian value. Whereas it is a fundamental value of secularism. There is no secularism without separation of church and state. So I really think that debate would have gone better if they'd have clarified exactly what they meant by Christianity versus secularism for that debate, because they were just talking past each other.
Just for anybody, right? Like what he's presenting is such a simplistic way of looking at it, and it gets really complicated really fast.
Just a reminder that the simplistic way of looking at it that he's talking about here came directly from the guy who it's named after. Sure, it can be modified over time, I don't see a problem with that, but I honestly haven't seen any formulations that really address any of its core issues.
It's a lot more complicated than people think, and the many gods objection and many of these standard objections that people think is just a kill shot to this argument doesn't really hold up in my opinion.
Well, it sure would be nice if you spent some time tackling the objections that I actually made, or explaining the nuances or complexities that I missed, instead of wasting it complaining that Islam is bad, something that we both agree on.
Yeah, and I would say I agree with Vice Rhino here that it's not really an argument for God's existence. I wouldn't use that. The way you use Pascal's Wager is if you've presented arguments for God's existence, arguments for Christianity, and you got them close to the line, but they just don't have enough to cross. That's where Pascal's Wager comes in. You go, okay, you've clearly studied the data. You're on the fence. Here's Pascal's Wager. This should just get you into theism. it's an argument. It's a pragmatic argument on top of actual arguments you've used to get them most of the way there, and then Pascal Wager.
Hold on. People in the chat are saying that
a wager based on faulty logic and incorrect assumptions doesn't suddenly become a better wager just because you're on the fence about Christianity. Sure, maybe it's an effective conversion tool at that point, but it still has all of the same issues that I already brought up. And that's it for this one. Don't worry, they won't all be this short. Today's comment of the day comes to us from Classic Indigo, who says, "Could you put something on the thumbnail so we know when you do new videos and when you redo older videos?" Well, typically, the me that appears in my thumbnails will be a still shot from the video itself, and also typically, I wear this darker jacket for the new stuff and the gray jacket for the old stuff. I won't promise that this will work 100% of the time, but it is a good bet that if the dark jacket's on the thumbnail, it's new material. Thanks for watching. I'll be back next Friday with more, but if you need to get your Rhino fix in before then, I live stream with Cirrus every Wednesday at 8:30 Eastern on my other channel, The Watering Hole. Thanks to Piper for being my editor, and special thanks as always to my patrons, who are the profit that is found in the Bible that is my channel. If you'd like to found a new religion, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/ViceRhino, or by supporting the channel in one of the other methods that can be found at links.vicerhino.com, which is also where you'll find links to my other projects. If for whatever reason you want to send me stuff, my P.O. Box address is in the description. See you next time. Let's try this again. Could we start again, please? It's okay, it's in a case. Can't put it on vibrate now, it's over there. Oh, I'm an idiot.